Save Queen of Sheba by Louise Moeri. Chapter 7. King David squatted over the little pile of dry sticks and buffalo chips he had made under the cut bank of the draw. As he fed wisps of grass into the tiny blue flame beneath the fuel, he watched anxiously as a plume of smoke spiraled up and then drifted away on the breeze. "Fan the smoke, Queen of Sheba," he said. "Don't let it go straight up. Make it break up and blow away." "I'm tired," crabbed Queen of Sheba. Her hand, waving a cluster of green branches, faltered. She still cradled the piece of twisted wood she called a doll in her other arm, patting and soothing it from time to time. "You want to eat, don't you? You want to eat something besides raw cornmeal? All right then, help." He had made the smallest fire possible and put the rabbit skinned, cleaned, and cut up in a little water in the small pan now balanced in the middle of the flames. Already the water was starting to boil, and the meat would be cooked enough to eat in a few minutes. And a few minutes, of course, was all that he could possibly risk of a fire. The smell of smoke would drift a long way. If there were any Indians about, it wouldn't take them long to figure out where they were. There could even be an outside chance that the raiders who attacked the wagon train might double back this way. Either way, King David knew he did not have enough ammunition to stand any of them off for more than a few minutes. But they had to have the meat. Raw cornmeal and apples would keep them from starving, maybe, but certainly not give them the strength they would need to cover the distance between them and the wagon train. He poked the rabbit with a clean stick. "Lord, this smells good." "I'm hungry." Queen of Sheba fanned the smoke listlessly. She looked tired, dirty, lost. Ma would never have let her get mud on her dress, stickers in her hair. He wondered for a moment what Ma and Pa would say if they could see their children now. Queen of Sheba in borrowed shoes, her face sunburned under a layer of dirt, and him with a gaping wound in the crown of his head. Give them a turn, it would. "I don't want to do this." Abruptly, Queen of Sheba threw down the branches and walked away. "Queen, damn it!" Queen of Sheba's eyes bulged. "You cussed! I'm going to tell Ma! Queen, you gotta help me! I can't do it by myself! Come back and fan the smoke! Please?" Queen of Sheba drew herself up haughtily. "I don't gotta do nothing! And I'm going to tell Ma you cussed, and that you hit me! Oh, Lord," he muttered. "Oh, Lord." Queen of Sheba stamped away and flung herself down on a fallen log. She rubbed her dirty hands over her face, and after a moment King David could see that she was crying. "I'm hungry," she said softly. "I want Ma." Wearily, King David stirred the fire and fed it a wisp of grass. "It don't do no good to fight with her. I gotta remember she's little," he told himself as he poured the water off the meat. "I gotta remember that she's little." "Here," he said, forcing himself to be cheerful. "The rabbit is done. Lord, this is going to taste good. Come here, Queen of Sheba. I'll let you eat out of the pan." For a few minutes they were silent as their fingers flew back and forth to their mouths. Queen of Sheba devoured her portion and picked the bones clean. King David noted her silence grimly. It was a good indication of how hungry she had been. When every scrap of the rabbit was gone, he selected an apple for each of them from the bundle. He even polished Queen of Sheba's apple briefly on his shirt sleeve. The flames were gone now. King David could not let the fire burn one extra minute, but there was a warm glow from the coals. Both of them crept close to the embers. Queen of Sheba stared into the dying fire. Hunched against the gathering chill, she looked cold and little and defenseless. Behind her, the shadows of the glade were dark and threatening. The willow trees only a fragile barrier between them and the dry, barren wilderness. "Here, wrap this coat around you, Queen," said King David. "I gotta let the fire die on account of it might be seen. But Lord, it felt good while it lasted." Queen of Sheba barely nodded. Overhead, the sky was darkening beyond the canopy of the trees, and the only sounds they could hear were the soft ripple of the stream, the first tentative hoots of an owl beginning his evening hunt, the crickets chirping in the heavy grass. Beyond the tiny circle of their camp, so barely furnished with a quilt, a few bites of food, the rifle, the knife, lay the prairie, the vast, silent, empty prairie. For a moment, as his thoughts flew up like birds from the spot to range outward over the dark plain around them, King David was gripped by an awful tide of panic. Was he, a 12-year-old boy, half dead already from the wound in his head, was he strong enough, smart enough, to overcome hunger and thirst, loneliness and distance, not to mention Queen of Sheba's foolishness, and take them forward over what unimaginable obstacles there might be to regain the safety of the wagon train? But I'm all there is. There's nobody but me, he told himself. Nobody. It's me or... "Tell me a story." King David looked up in surprise. He had thought Queen of Sheba was dozing. "Story?" he said blankly. "Tell me a story. Ma always tells me a story at night." She stared confidently at him, as one who has only to ask and it shall be given. She looked like a frowsy little brown owl, perched on the fallen log, with the wooden doll cradled in her lap. I can't think of a story." King David searched his memory, but taken unaware, he couldn't recall a single tale to tell her. Queen of Sheba began to cry. "Ma always tells me a story." "Oh, all right. Hush up. Be quiet. Let's see. How about the story of our names?" "I've heard that one before." Queen of Sheba huddled the wooden doll under her chin and rubbed her hand over her eyes. He could see she was very sleepy. If he could just keep talking just another minute or two, she would go to sleep. And then he could feed the horse, check her ropes, and get some sleep himself. "Well, it's all I can think of. Anyway, there was this big king called David, way back a long time ago," he began. He sat hunched over, braced against the trunk of a cottonwood, with the rifle across his knees, as he reached far back into memory of old days when Ma, knitting or sewing patchwork beside the fireplace after supper, had told them the history of their own beginnings. And this King David was a great soldier. "You was going to tell me about my name. I'm getting to it. Well, this David killed Goliath, a very bad giant, and a whole bunch of other bad men. He had an army, and he marched around the country making laws and telling the people to do right. At last he got to be the king there in Jerusalem." Queen of Sheba yawned. "And everybody heard how great he was. And he wrote songs. We call them psalms. And when I was born, Pa said he wanted to name me after him because he was strong in the battle for the Lord." "Tell me about Sheba." His sister's eyes were heavy and she was nodding. Well, David, he had a son called Solomon, and Solomon was a great king too. Well, not as great as David. Queen of Sheba's face darkened. But he was a pretty great king. King David conceded grudgingly. In fact, he was so great that people heard about him in other countries far away. And there was a great queen of a country called Sheba. And she wanted to know if Solomon was as wonderful as she had heard he was. So she loaded up all her servants and her gold and treasures on her camels and elephants. And she made a long journey. She went all the way to Jerusalem to see Solomon. And when she got there, she gave Solomon lots of presents, and he gave her lots of presents. Gold? Asked Queen of Sheba sleepily. Jewels? Yeah, all of them things. And then the Queen of Sheba went home to her own country. And so when you was born, he did not tell her that 2 other babies had been born and died before her. Ma and Pa thought you was really something wonderful. So they called you Queen of Sheba, because she was a great lady, and they want you to be a great lady too. Queen of Sheba sank quietly down on the leafy ground. I'm going to be a great lady, she whispered as she fell asleep. King David took the quilt and tucked it around her, scraped dirt over the coals to cover the fire. As he took up the rifle to make a round of the grove and the camp and feed the horse, he looked down. Yeah, you'll be a great lady someday, if I can keep you alive. Chapter 8. Day dawned brassy and unusually warm. King David woke sweating, and when he struggled to sit up, he could see there was a heavy dew on the grass. For several moments, he sat staring around at the shaded dell beside the creek. He felt nervous, almost afraid, as if he had been awakened by a noise of something dangerous, and yet he could see nothing to cause immediate alarm. Downstream a few yards, the bay mare Maggie dozed on her feet, her tail switching off a few early flies. Queen of Sheba still slept, wrapped in the quilt. The remains of the little fire were long since only blackened coals, and he had buried the bones of the rabbit, so as to keep any wandering coyotes or wolves from smelling them and venturing too near their camp. He raised a hand and carefully felt the wound on his head. He was vastly relieved to feel the swelling less and no wet ooze seeping out of it, but he wondered what it looked like. It gave him an uneasy feeling that there was this gaping hole in the scalp and hair that ought to cover his skull. A person hadn't ought to be walking around with broad daylight shining down into his brains. After a few moments of fruitlessly thinking about his wound, he crept quietly over to the sack of cornmeal and ate several mouthfuls, washing them down with water dipped up from the creek in his palm. On his feet at last, he stretched, tried out a good walking stride. He was still shaky, but enormously improved over yesterday. Take more to kill me, he told himself grimly, than a Sioux knife. He untied the mare and took her to the stream to drink, and then, with the rifle close at hand, gathered bunches of grass for her. Maggie tossed the sweet grass with her nose and then settled into a comfortable munching. King David stood silent for a moment beside the mare. He had never taken her harness off, and she was probably pretty tired of it by now. He ran his hands in under the collar, but could find no raw places where it was wearing on her tough hide, and no stickers or ticks. Of all the things that could happen to them now, loss of the horse would hit them the hardest, next to losing the rifle. Maggie, he assured himself, looked fit. Time to get ready. Get started. He waked Queen of Sheba and bade her to eat some cornmeal. Queen Sheba was cranky. I don't want cornmeal. I want some hot mush with milk on. Ain't got any. Where's Ma? I want my Ma. That's what we're going to do today, Queen of Sheba. We're going to start catching up with the wagons. With Ma and Pa. Queen of Sheba sat up. We're going to find Ma today? Well, he wondered how much to promise her. Queen of Sheba was old enough to remember what he said and to hold him to it. We're going to start today. I don't reckon we'll catch up for 3, maybe 4 or 5 days. It depends on how fast we can travel. He knew they had lost a serious amount of time. The wagons would have traveled, probably at a gallop, for a short distance during the actual attack. More than likely they would have rested a short while to let the horses blow and then struggled on. Wagon Master Keen, if he was still alive, would press them hard as he could to put as much distance behind them as possible. For every mile they passed brought them nearer to Fort Laramie in safety. Trouble was, King David did not know how far he and Queen of Sheba were from the fort, nor exactly where it lay. Fortunately, he had paid close attention when the men of the train were talking among themselves, and had automatically memorized everything he had heard about landmarks and the trail between here and Fort Laramie. The land would be rising gradually out of the endless prairie, and there would be bluffs and outcroppings of rocks, ravines, and more sandhills. The wagon train had already sighted Chimney Rock a couple of days before the raid, and had camped at Robidoux Pass in the Scotts Bluffs country the night before the Indian attack. One branch of the main wagon trail followed directly from there along the south bank of the North Platte River, but the wagons of their own train had taken the other branch of the trail farther to the south, and now they had even veered to the south of that trail, probably cut off by the Indians. And King David felt that he had to follow the wagons of his own party, rather than turn north to the main trail. If they could make good enough time, they should be able to catch up, because a wagon train seldom made much more than 15 miles a day. Finding a horse had made all the difference in the world to them. By taking turns riding her, their chances of either catching up or at least making it to the fort before they got so hungry they could no longer travel were 100 times better. King David was not too worried about finding their way, following the wagons across the empty land. All he had to do was stay with the tracks of horses and wagons, and a half-blind man could do that. He was worried about Indians, about food, about water, but not about following the trail. 14 wagons and a herd of loose cattle and horses would leave a trail that even a boy like himself could follow. The sun was climbing, glinting in his eyes. Time to go. King David untied the mare and brought her back to the little camp. He rolled the pack and fastened it across the mare's back by lashing it to her harness. Maggie turned her head and snuffed the pack, but made no real effort to dislodge it, though once or twice she raised a hind hoof as if she would kick him if he got behind her. King David was careful to stay where she could not land a blow with those huge hammers, and he wished he had more time to try the mare out, see how gentle she was before he trusted her to carry Queen of Sheba. But he had only so much strength, and even less time. "Come here, Queen." He grabbed his sister and lifted her, with one convulsive surge of energy that left him gasping, but got her onto the horse. Queen of Sheba's eyes bulged, and her free hand clenched the right hame. Her left arm was wrapped around her doll. For one moment, both of them were silent, while they waited to see what Maggie would do. Then Maggie's head went down, and King David thought she was going to buck. He seized the bridle and pulled her sharply around. Maggie, distracted, laid her ears back, but seemed unable to concentrate on her aggravation. She snorted, coughed, bared her teeth, but didn't buck. King David let out a tightly held breath. He picked up the rifle in his right hand, took the halter rope in his left, and led Maggie up out of the creek bed, turned toward the west. They were on their way.